to present a tale of humanity, loss, greed, grief.
Start beforehand.
Because that's how YouTube works. It can only be on like videos and like the beginning of streams.
Twitch is too greedy, man.
Yeah, it is. Twitch is just absolutely greedy. I streamed from
Like,
Twitch for
think
like
about
4
the
years.
smaller.
I know your vision because we share it.
To being allies and friends.
Boy loved the fairy tale about the wooden puppets' adventure. At least the wooden puppet's father was kind. Golden lie.
Lies of P is a game that tells a beautiful and tragic story, one that reimagines Carlo Collodi's Pinocchio to present a tale of humanity, loss, greed, grief, and second chances. As someone who treasures meaningful stories told through this medium, Lies of P is one that has impacted me more than most, and this great story is supported by a rich lore that acts as a backbone to the game. Lies of P Overture is coming this summer, and so I thought this would be a good opportunity to do a full story recap for those who are new to the game or perhaps just want a refresher for the DLC. In this video, I will do my best to cover every major plot point, and I believe the length of this video will speak for itself. Lies of P is such an extraordinary game that tackles so many subjects and has so many incredible characters who each have a story.
Yeah, he literally made this video 2 hours and 55 minutes, like what a goddamn champion.
To tell. At its core, it challenges us to understand what it is that makes us human, and it does this via its rich characters. Beyond the human element, it also dives into some complex themes regarding celestial life, evolution, cultural myths, and the concept of time. With such a multifaceted story, it is hard not to feel invested in every moment of its telling. From Pinocchio's awakening to the final fateful confrontation with the alchemists, every moment is utterly compelling. All of that to say, this story is incredibly dense, and thus I have chaptered and segmented this video in a way I believe most effectively breaks down the story before finally concluding with my final thoughts on what the DLC may have in store for us. Before we begin, I would like to say that if you haven't played this game yourself, I would urge you to do that before you watch this video. It truly is a special game, and I am so pleased I got to play it with zero spoilers. and I truly wish for you to have the experience for yourself. So with that said, grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let us dive into the wonderful world of Krat.
Make sure we get in here and like this video.
Huh?
I was just saying that we need to make sure we gotta like this video because this video editing is superb.
Lies of P quite clearly wears its inspiration on its sleeve, though I hesitate to call it a retelling, because while it takes the general premise from Pinocchio, it very much has its own story to tell and a great depth of lore that transcends that original story. However, as I say, the general premise is there, so let us briefly discuss an overview of the original tale of Pinocchio. The Adventures of Pinocchio was written by Carlo Collodi in 1883, and immediately you can see the importance of these facts to Lies of P. In the game, Geppetto's son was called Carlo, and the game seems to be set in a similar time period to that when the book was written. For clarity, I believe the game takes place in the year 1889, taking together some fragmented dates we can find throughout the game world. In short, the story features a woodcarver called Geppetto, who creates a wooden puppet named Pinocchio. The puppet comes to life, and during the course of the story becomes a real boy. Of the course of these adventures, Pinocchio comes into contact with a colourful cast of characters, many of which are reimagined for Lies of P. Thematically, in a lot of ways, Pinocchio was a story that was ahead of its time. In stories like Soma and Mass Effect, AI and technology is used to examine the human condition, to ask questions of consciousness and life. Pinocchio did this same thing, but nearly 300 years ago, and by using a wooden puppet, who would become a real boy. Therefore, as you'd expect, Lies of P plays into similar themes, and it certainly does in a profound way, while expanding its own world of lore and adding in some modern twists. In many ways, we start the game part way through the story, as events and plots years in the making come to fruition. The city of Krat has had an interesting history, with the major players playing a massive role in its current downfall. By the time Pinocchio is awoken, a lot has happened, and so I believe it is important to give a thorough breakdown of Krat's history. When P reaches the hotel, we are treated to a cinematic while the credits roll, and this slideshow more or less spells out the major events of Krat's history prior to the events of the game.
I'm gonna give them 1 more minute.
The first few slides show one of the most important events in the game's lore, and that's the arrival of the alchemists, the event that changed Krat forever. Krat wasn't always the city of the future we see it as today, and that is evidenced by the city's coat of arms, which is a fish. Given what we see of Krat now, it feels a little out of place. However, this symbol harkens back to Krat's humble origin as a fishing hamlet. This is told to us in the document called Primer for Workshop Technicians, which reads the following. No other city in the world today has been receiving more attention than Krat, the city of puppets. Back when the Almighty V visited, it was still just a fishing village. It has undergone a brilliant change in the past 30 years, spurred by Krat's puppet industry. It is extraordinary to consider that Krat has become such an advanced city in a mere 3 decades, and that prior to that it was relatively humble. Indeed, areas such as Moonlight Town, which remain fairly rustic in appearance, were some of the earliest parts of the town, and as a result we perhaps use it as an illustration of what Krat once looked like. A far cry from the modern metropolis we see now. You can actually get a glimpse of how Krat looked prior to its industrialization in the opening cinematic, which shows the alchemists first arriving in Krat. In this we see a much more stripped back skyline, with no tram lines or high-rise buildings. The 2 main buildings that still stand out are that of the Krat Castle, which would later become Hotel Krat, and we can also see the Cathedral of St. Frangelico on the ridge. We are aware of both of these buildings existing for centuries prior to modern Krat, so this makes sense. Aside from these 2 buildings, it seems as though Krat is a humble town made up of wooden shacks. Indeed, some of the earliest history we are aware of is the story of St. Frangelico, and how Moonlight Town became a religious site in the first place. This comes from the Moonlight Town Guide, which reads the following. Moonlight Town is the lowest place in the city, where pilgrims prepare for their journeys. Since St. Frangelico met the one-winged angel and founded the church, Moonlight Town has become known as the place where pilgrims are lifted to the cathedral by pulley and prepare for their pilgrimages. Andreas is the current head of the Krat Church.
I just gotta say, Liza P did such a good job with their lore. They took the Pinocchio thing and they made their own story. They did really well at making it feel like it was a Souls game made by From Software, even though it wasn't. And it was a small company at first too.
But its founding and history goes back much further, to the figure known as St. Frangelico. We know that it was Andreas who built the church to the impressive size it is now, using alchemist money, but clearly the introductory cinematic shows it was still relatively impressive, which no doubt represents how important it was. People would make a pilgrimage up the hill to visit the site, and we know from a loading screen that the people of Moonlight Town would later resist the funicular railway that would be built during the recent era, as climbing up the hill was seen as a rite of passage. However, what is important here is the religious beliefs behind St. Frangelico's story, as these likely have a lot of truth to them, and it is worth explaining some of the unique beliefs that the Krat citizens hold. We are told from a number of sources that the founding event of this church was when St. Frangelico met with a one-winged angel. This is why this land is considered holy, and pilgrims would make the journey up the hill. This mythological being is central to the church. Not only do we see many statues of angels in general, but in a shrine that you can access prior to the church, we specifically get a depiction of a one-winged angel. We also see the one wing as a recurring symbol within Krat society, again reinforcing that this is a figure of great cultural importance to Krat. So what is this being and how does it tie into the greater story? There is an artifact of great import to the game's events that I believe is connected to this ancient story, and that is the Arm of God, an item that Simon Manus will use to transform himself, as did Andreas, and it is finally used by Geppetto to revive his dead son Carlo. So even without delving too deep into the lore, you can see that this is an artifact of great power and significance. We will trace the changing hands of this item later on, but for now I want to tie it to the one-winged angel, so let us read its item description. The Arm of God, obtained after defeating Simon Manus. It is a mysterious relic that the alchemists treated as a sacred object. The alchemists believed that there was once a god who was ripped to shreds, trying to give immortal life to the humans he so loved, and they wanted to revive him. However, the god who was deep...
Oh.
in sleep never answered their prayers, so this arm is clearly evidence of some kind of
Almost
cosmic
done.
living being. And given we have a myth of
Okay.
a great being coming down and embracing St. Frangelico, is it not likely that these are one and the same? That this arm is remnant of that angel? We learn more of this being, this god, from a series of documents called So Said Pistris 1, 2, and 3. This document seems to be written by a character called Adriana, who is recording the words of a person called Pistris, who comes across as a religious figure addressing a congregation of some kind. We actually know who these characters are. Adriana is the former name of Laxasia the Complete, and Pistris is the middle name of Simon Manus. For those brand new to the game, these two characters are two of the current leading members of the Alchemists, and the main antagonists of the story. We will return to them shortly, but for now I want to focus on the information these documents provide about the god. So bear with me while I read some segments from each of these three documents. The first document reads the following. Listen, my brothers and sisters. I, Pistris, shall tell you about the world's secrets. In the beginning, it was a wish. It had to be a wish. It's the only paradise perishable humans can have. For thousands of years, humans' wishes perished, but one reached a star. That was a miracle. More so because that star was a very good one. The star answered the humans and descended to Earth. Then everything began. So here we hear of a being that is referred to as a star, likely a cosmic being that was reached out to by humans. The second document reads the following. A star that was curious about humans pretended to be human, then became one. The humans saw its splendor and called it an angel. Although its form was the same,
Well, just like with souls. You gotta have some sort of cosmic being or entity, man.
its substance was different, the undying substance, the breath of metal that lives forever. That is the reason humans wished for an angel. The angel gladly shared immortality with humans, but that blessing wasn't for everyone. This more or less confirms that this being is Saint Frangelico's one-winged angel,
Yeah.
and that it was
That's
curious
why
about
looking at this,
humans,
now
and so took on this angelic form to communicate with them.
It's
What this
just a
star looked
Minecraft
like-
dog.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was talking to my daughter and like wolf stuff,
Yeah.
and before we were talking about any wolf, talking about Minecraft, and Minecraft just two.
Perfect. Yeah. Fuck yeah. That's good. It's more like a dog.
before is anyone's guess, but it is clear that it openly interacted with humans and even tried to help them. This is where Saint Frangelico's legend was born, and it is the foundational event of Krat's religion, and I believe the event that kick-started everything. Interestingly, it also tells us that its form is undying and metallic in nature, and I do think it is likely that Moonstone, the item we use to reinforce our weapons, is made from this being, given it is a metallic-looking substance that is said not to be of this world. Additionally, we learn that this being tried to share its immortality with humanity, and this does mesh with the lore included within the Arm of God, telling us this creature was torn apart, trying to do so. The third document in this series elaborates on this dismemberment, as it reads the following. An angel's gift was something humans dare not enjoy. Many humans died with hope in their hearts, and the ones who lived harbored rage instead of death. Eventually humans destroyed and burned their hope on their own. This is how the angel became the god torn to death. But today there are definitely those who survived with the blessing. They, the immortal ones, still walk around and wish for the resurrection of God. I clearly told the truth I witnessed. So why was the one-armed angel torn apart? Why would humanity not like the form of immortality provided by the angel? Well, I think it all comes back to the central material of this story, Ergo. Ergo is an energy source that is found within crystals, which exist in a mine below Krat. These crystals are not natural growths, but in fact are the remains of crystallized people, who become this way via a malady known as the petrification disease. Sophia says the following about the nature of Ergo and the petrification disease.
Ergo is the essence of life. made from the petrification disease. It contains the memories and distilled lifespan of the victim. That's why puppets sometimes awaken their old selves, or describe someone else's memories. The petrification disease freezes time and memory within the afflicted body. Ergo is the purified essence of that life, trapped by the petrification disease.
The petrification disease is what creates Ergo, by solidifying the human body, yet not killing the soul that exists within. So in basic terms, Ergo is a substance found within the crystallized remains of those affected by the petrification disease. This disease turns humans into crystals, but their soul or essence persists inside, their consciousness preserved beyond time.
It has a
Carcasses
gun.
are not the natural endpoint of this disease, and
Like a
Sophia
pistol.
tells us that these are in fact the result of alchemist
He
meddling.
was important.
The cathedral.
Dunkin's $6 meal deal. It's a big deal. You get a medium iced or hot coffee, sausage, egg, and cheese, and 6 toast.
It's another unknown or
It
God
seems
damn it.
nowhere is safe now. Maybe those who went there seeking refuge became monsters somehow. But the petrification disease turns you to stone, not into a monster. Simon coveted Ergo's power, and he noticed that the process of curing the petrification disease could also create enhanced humans. Krat became a city of monsters and petrification disease because of Simon's terrible experiments.
We will talk about carcasses soon, but I just wanted to make it clear from the outset that the monsters we face in Krat are not the natural form of this disease and are a result of Simon's experimentation. Left to its own devices, the petrification disease crystallizes people, and their trapped soul becomes Ergo. This is how characters like Romeo, Carlo, and Sophia are able to have second lives when their ego reawakens within the Ergo. To clarify what I've just said, a person's essence or spirit is preserved within Ergo after they have been affected by the petrification disease. Their consciousness can thus lie dormant within the Ergo until certain events reawaken that old personality. In the world of Lies of P, this is called ego reawakening, and it is why the personality of those killed by the disease can be found within certain puppets, as each puppet has Ergo within it that it uses as a power source. The crystals found within the cave, known as the Relic of Trismegistus, seem to be the only examples of this crystallization process. However, for a long time the residents of this region seemed not to know the value of the crystals, nor that they contained Ergo. In fact, we can see from the document known as the Order of Crowd Report that it was known as Crowd, and indeed the people of this region had no clue about its properties. Ergo and petrification disease were the gifts of immortality that this god gave to the people, and it wasn't what they expected. While Lies of P does end on an uplifting note, and Ergo can be used to give people a second chance at life, it is a terrifying fate if not utilised correctly. Yes, Geppetto is able to use surrogate bodies, puppets, to give the likes of Sophia and Carlo a second chance, But Geppetto is a rarefied genius, and this lucky fate is not available for everyone. For the vast majority of people who succumb to the petrification disease, they will likely become trapped or a lost consciousness within the stream of ergo. In terms of a timeline, I would suggest that the one-winged angel came to the Earth over 600 years ago. My main source for believing so comes from the Order of Crowd document, which tells us that the first reported encounter of this substance, of ergo crystals, is from 600 years ago, and that is only the first reported encounter. And so the events of the one-winged angel were at least 600 years ago, and likely even further back. Ergo and the petrification disease were its gifts to humanity, and yet becoming a crystal was not the immortality that many humans expected, and this is what led to the angel being torn apart. Time would pass and memory of this event would become legend, and the ergo crystals would lie under Krat for many years, completely untouched. For a long time following this, few would understand the significance of Crowd, not even the aristocrats of Krat. This ignorance is revealed in a letter between a member of the Krat aristocracy and the leader of the alchemists. In this letter, the aristocrat named Wolf expresses surprise and annoyance that he and his peers had no idea of the value that lay beneath their feet all this time. Interestingly, Wolf also gives a different name to this cave, the Devil's Pit. Again, the naming of this pit in this manner reveals an ignorance of its true history and value. However, with that said, there is something I have skipped over that I am sure you may have picked up on. In So Said Pistrus 3, Simon mentions that some people did get the gift of immortality in that first encounter and that they still exist to this day. This means that Simon believes there are people who were made immortal in that first encounter with the one-winged angel, who are still living to this day, and thus they must be at least 600 years old. But who are these immortals? Well, I believe one of them to be a character we meet in-game, a man who calls himself Giangio, but is in fact a legendary figure called Paracelsus. He has many reasons to hide his true identity, and you may just think the fact he is hiding the fact he is one of the alchemists. This is something we learn via the Ouroboros Eye, that he is a legendary figure even among their ranks. However, at the end of the game, it seems as though Paracelsus is also a member of a group that is even more secretive and knowledgeable than the alchemists. Even the alchemists formed part of what Paracelsus calls the Krat experiment. I believe this group to be one made up of immortals, and one dedicated to making more of their kind. His final call more or less confirms that is their goal.
You certainly took your time, Paracelsus. Your findings?
I think we have a new brother. A new type of humanity, so to speak.
There are many forms of eternal life.
It's intriguing and
So
worth further
what the
observation.
fuck is going on?
Noted. And we'll have to get his arm back anyway.
He leaves a letter to the player after the final events of the game, and he congratulates us on achieving immortality, and that it was great to see a new brother ascend to his ranks. He isn't talking about a puppet brother, he is talking about a brother in immortality. In case you aren't aware, you get this letter in all endings, meaning the resurrected Carlo and Pinocchio are both considered to be a form of immortality. This makes sense because Carlo is also a being of ergo by the end, who has cheated death, and Pinocchio is an ageless being with a soul inside. It of course means that Paracelsus himself is an immortal. His appearance does suggest he is a being suffused with ergo. His blue hair is similar to Sophia's. In case you aren't aware, Sophia didn't actually start with blue hair, she had dark hair, and we can see this in an original painting of her that is kept by the obsessive Simon Manus. Her blue hair is clearly a result of her connection and exposure to ergo, and I suggest that Paracelsus' hair is also indicative of his nature. That means that Paracelsus has been in Krat before, and indeed I believe he was there from the very beginning, and again there is some evidence to support this. First is that in the final phone call to his colleague, he talks about getting the arm of God back. The suggestion that it was also an experiment implies that the entire series of events was orchestrated by him and his associates. Getting the arm back suggests that he and his colleagues possessed it previously, and perhaps they did so because they are the original immortal survivors of the one-winged angel's first arrival. Perhaps they only parted with the arm to trigger this experiment. Additionally, if Paracelsus is an original immortal, one who avoided the crystallization process of the petrification disease, then it perhaps suggests that he and his group went through this exact cycle over 600 years ago. Additionally, there is seemingly a contradiction in the lore regarding the gold coin fruit tree that can be explained by the theory that the alchemists have been here before. Sophia tells us that the gold coin fruit trees are actually alchemist experiments, who were once human ergo listeners like her.
But the alchemists have tainted everything. The gold coin tree is a pathetic creature they created from the listeners. Like many of their creations, it's tragic, but useful.
All right, everybody, it's time. Not just to go back to school, but to come back and move forward. Start your
You can control ergo with gold coin fruits. The sad tears of those who became trees.
So you would first presume that this is a creation of the last 30 years, since the alchemists came here. However, there is also an old story about the castle of Krat, which claims that it was built here by a knight, specifically because of the presence of the gold coin tree. To clarify, Hotel Krat was once a castle, then a mental asylum, before being purchased and turned into a hotel by Antonia. So the tree in the hotel courtyard is the one the castle was supposedly built around. So how did the tree exist here hundreds of years ago, if the alchemists only came here in the past 3 decades? Well, the answer is that the alchemists have a far older history than most of the members realize, and it is only immortals like Paracelsus who remember this. I thus suggest that the alchemists actually were founded in Krat hundreds of years ago, and the reason they are obsessed with immortality is because their ancient members once had an encounter with this celestial being. They have just forgotten it. So when Paracelsus leads the organization back to Krat, they are not making a new discovery. Rather, they are just returning home and they just do not realize it. Evidence of this long history can be seen in the ancient
There's
language
no
and
way.
symbolism found on their arch abbey, albeit this is not an ancient building, as we learn from Arlecchino that it was built specifically to harvest ergo for Simon's plan.
This tower is absorbing all the ergo in Krat. It was built in this precise location because it's the most efficient place in the world to study and use ergo wavelengths.
No doubt this location chosen by Simon is why they would become known as the Alchemists of the Isle, but under the previous leader's direction, I believe they were much more embedded in Krat itself. Indeed, a loading screen tells us that they own a number of facilities, in addition to the abbey, and so prior to its construction, I believe they instead were based within Krat itself. In the letter between Valentinus and Volf, the construction of a Zelator laboratory is mentioned, and I presume this to have been one of the main facilities of the alchemists before Simon created the Arch Abbey. So let us talk about the history of the alchemists since they arrived in Krat 30 years ago. There is a loading screen that gives us some interesting information about the alchemists and their beliefs. It tells us that they are brilliant scientists, engineers, and doctors, but they also blend this knowledge with religious and cultural beliefs. Thus, it makes sense that such a group would therefore not dismiss religious or cultural stories